Good afternoon, distinguished guests and speaker and everyone. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Very clearly.
Okay. On behalf of Office of Research Affairs, I would like to extend a warm welcome all of you to Masterclass on avoiding journal rejections due to language errors. We are honored to have you all here, and my name is Pakuipa. First of all, I would like to invite Associate Professor Dr. Pani Chivinsiriwat, Assistant to the President's Research Affairs, for the welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Pakuipa. Good afternoon, everyone. And first of all, I would like to welcome Mr. Tony O'Rourke, the Vice President at the INEGO, and Nicole and all of your INEGO team to our Chulalongkorn University. And I also would like to welcome our audience here today as well. I think that we have both faculties and also students as well to be with us today. And I would like to thank you, the INEGO team, for providing us this session about the masterclass on avoiding journal rejections due to language errors. Because I think that all of us, when we submit our paper, we don't want to be rejected because of the English language. So I hope that the session today will be quite useful for all of us today. And actually, I would like to say something about the collaboration between INEGO and Chulalongkorn University for a little bit for our Chula members. May I switch this to Thai for a while? And after that, I will pass this session to the INEGO team later.
Sure.
ค่ะก็สวัสดีทุกท่านนะคะท่านอาจารย์แล้วก็นิสิตของจุฬาลงกรณ์นะคะจริงๆแล้วบริษัท INEGO เนี่ยเป็นบริษัทที่เป็นบริษัทภายนอกนะคะที่ทำหน้าที่ให้บริการเกี่ยวกับเรื่องของ language editing ก็คือเรื่องของการปรับแก้ภาษาอังกฤษเวลาที่เราจะ submit paper ของเราออกไปให้ที่ต่างประเทศนะคะที่ journal นะคะทีนี้เนี่ยเราเนี่ยเข้าใจว่าเรามีความร่วมมือกันตั้งแต่สมัยท่านรองเกียรตินะคะก็คือสมัยท่านอธิการบัณฑิตช่วงสมัยแรกวาระแรกแล้วก็พอเป็นวาระที่2ของท่านอธิการบัณฑิตเนี่ยก็ได้มีการลงนาม MOU นะคะในสมัยของท่านรองจักรพันธ์นะคะก็คิดว่าตอนนี้ก็ล่วงเลยมาประมาณ 3-4 ปีนะคะที่เรามีMOU ร่วมกับที่ INEGO ทีนี้ INEGO เนี่ยใน MOU ทำอะไรบ้างเนี่ยINEGO ก็จะมีพอร์ทัลอันนึงนะคะคือมีหน้าเว็บหนึ่งที่ให้บริการสำหรับคนของจุฬาถ้าเราเข้าไปใช้บริการผ่านเว็บนั้นเนี่ยแล้วก็ใช้อีเมลของจุฬาเราก็จะได้รับส่วนลดประมาณ 50% นะคะจากราคาปกติที่ INEGO เขาชาร์จกับคนอื่นๆทีนี้นอกเหนือจากการให้ส่วนลดเนี่ย INEGO ก็จะมีการจัดเซสชั่นแบบนี้ค่ะให้พวกเรานะคะเป็นระยะครั้งนี้ก็จะเป็นเรื่องของการทำยังไงไม่ให้ถูกรีเจ็คด้วยเรื่องของภาษานะคะแต่ก่อนหน้านี้เนี่ยก็จะมีอย่างเช่นเขียน proposal ยังไงให้ได้ทุนนะคะหรือว่าการใช้ AI ในการช่วยเขียนตัว proposal หรือว่าตัว paper ก็ตามนะคะเพราะฉะนั้นเนี่ยบริการเหล่านี้แล้วก็ความร่วมมือตรงนี้เนี่ยก็อยากให้พวกเราได้รับประโยชน์กันอย่างเต็มที่นะคะดังนั้นวันนี้เนี่ยหลังจากที่ฟังเซสชันนี้แล้วหากว่ายังต้องการให้มีเซสชันอื่นๆในเรื่องไหนนะคะก็เขียนเข้ามาในช่องแชทได้เลยนะคะก็ยินดีต้อนรับทุกท่านนะคะแล้วก็ขอบพระคุณมากๆที่มาร่วมรับฟังกันในวันนี้แล้วก็หวังว่าจะเป็นประโยชน์นะคะก็ thank you very much ค่ะขอบคุณค่ะ
Thank you, Professor. May I now invite our distinguished speaker, Mr. Tony, Vice President, Partnership at INEGO.
Well, okay, I will just share a brief and then I'll hand over the mic to Tony. Thank you, Prof. Pani, for setting the context very well. And thank you all for joining today's webinar. This session is the part of Author Education Initiative under the partnership between INEGO and Chulalongkorn University. We are grateful for this opportunity to serve Thai academicians. Just a brief background, Inago has been providing scientific editing services to the academicians for the past 2 decades now. Having served millions of authors, our team of experts hold immense experience in varied subject areas, making us an ideal partner for a researcher journey. Now, I hand over the virtual stage to my colleague, Mr. Tony, to walk you through the challenges faced by the ESL academicians while navigating publication paradigm. Over to you, Tony.
Thank you very much, Ari, and what a pleasure it is to be speaking to everyone this morning. Can we go back one slide, please? So I'm Tony O'Rourke. No, can we go back to the? That's it. Thank you. So I'm Tony O'Rourke. I've been working in academic publishing, in scholarly publishing, for over 30 years, and have a reasonable understanding, I think, after all this time of what works. I have with me also my colleague Kiran from the Inago Academy editing team. So if you have any particularly technical questions that you'd like to ask, feel free to do so. We'd like to make this session as interactive as possible. So there are polls. We invite you to ask questions. Please, anything you'd like to share, we'd like to see. We'll try and take questions towards the end in a Q&A session. But if there is a particularly relevant question, we may answer it at the time when you raise it. Next slide, please. So, next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So what are we going to cover today? So the agenda is very simple. We're going to look at one particular strategy to avoid rejections. You know, it's true that perfectly good papers can be rejected for a wide variety of reasons. And we'll look at some of these reasons later on. But there are things which are in the control of the author, and we can look at how avoiding language mistakes can improve your chances of your paper being accepted. It doesn't guarantee it, but will improve your chances, because we know it is one of the reasons why a good paper can get rejected. So in today's session, we're going to be looking at the impact language errors can have within academic publishing, some of the common language mistakes made by ESL researchers, English as a second language researchers, and tips how to avoid them, some strategies for enhancing your language skills, and the importance of using a professional editor to help bring your content to the right level for submission. And then we'll have a Q&A session at the end with any questions that you may be asking during the chat. And as you see, there is a chat room, a chat option here, so please feel free to ask your questions there. Next. So if you go to the next slide, it's poll time. So we'd like you to answer this particular question, and you can answer any of these that you feel is relevant. What measures do you take to avoid journal desk rejection? And please answer all that reply. So can you please answer one of the following? Is it carefully follow journal submission guidelines, proofread and edit myself, take expert help to proofread and edit, check for plagiarism, do pre-submission peer review, or none of the above? So have you all voted? I'll give you a couple of seconds more. Okay, let's move to the next slide. So interesting. It's a fairly mixed bag of results, as you can see here. 16% of, so I beg your pardon, 16 out of 22 people have said that carefully following journal guidelines is key. It is absolutely key. Proofreading, editing myself, only 41%. 73% of you look to take expert help to proofread and edit. Excellent. Only 55% check for plagiarism. I think you'll find that's going to be increasingly important as we move forward. And 27% of you will do pre-submission peer review, which is interesting. And a small proportion do none of the above. So none of those answers are wrong or right. All of those are correct. And we would urge you to take as many measures as possible to avoid that pre-peer review, that desk rejection decision. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're now going to look at the first topic on the agenda, which is the impact of language errors and the impact it can have in a variety of ways. Next slide. We go back one slide, please. So we're looking at some of the outcomes poor language quality will have. The increased risk of rejections, it increases the likelihood of errors and inaccuracies and inconsistencies, which can lead to rejections and can potentially damage the reputation of the author and the integrity of the research. We're looking at reduced visibility. It can have reduced visibility in terms of reducing impact and readability. Complex language with grammatical errors or badly written content can decrease the readability of the manuscript, which you don't want. You want your research to be read. A poorly written manuscript may fail to attract attention from readers and researchers, and limiting the visibility and impact within your research community. Another reason it can lead to reductions, decreased citation performance, decreased and poor bibliometrics. Manuscripts with subpar language quality are less likely to be read. If it's a badly written paper, why would anyone read it? This affects bibliometric indicators such as citation counts, impact factors, for example, or the H-index or others. It can have a negative impact on reputation and career progression if you have a reputation for writing badly written or poorly written manuscripts. It can impede career advancement and possible opportunities for collaboration, and could potentially impact negatively on your ability to contribute within the academic community if you're someone that's considered to not be writing papers as well as they could. So let's look at some of the reasons on the next slide then why papers are rejected. As I said earlier on, language is not the only reason why a paper might get rejected. There are a whole range of reasons. And this particular study, which was conducted by the Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology of India, reveals the different reasons. They asked the editors why papers were being rejected. So as you can see here, poor language is one of the top 7 reasons why it scored, I think, about 15% of rejections in this particular case out of 400 papers were rejected because of poor language, all avoidable as well. But there were other reasons, which we haven't got time to talk about today. But we will focus on that one area of poor language. Next slide, please. So as you can see here, this is another piece of research that was done by the International Journal of Education and Literacy Studies. And this showed that language was the second most common reason for rejection. In this particular case, it was 17% were rejected by the board of this particular journal due to language problems between 2018 and 2020. And was ranked second of the top 10 reasons why papers could be rejected. But as I say, there are other reasons as well, but you can control language. Next slide, please. Okay, we have another poll. How important do you think improving your language skills is for your professional development? Please pick one in this case. How important do you think improving your language skills is for professional development? A few seconds more. Okay, do we have the poll results yet? Oh, absolutely. I mean, 100% of you said it was moderately important or higher. Absolutely right. This is you're communicating to a global audience. English is the language of research. It's so important that the language is as good as possible and that your skills are as honed as possible. Part of your professional development. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're going to look at the impact of good writing skills. And there are 4 primary reasons why good writing skills are important. Firstly, it helps you to communicate research effectively, of course. It helps increase the chances of acceptance for publication. I cannot tell you the number of times I've seen papers which are perfectly good papers, but really lacked a polish in terms of the quality of language being used, and were therefore rejected because of that reason. Good language, good writing skills will allow you as a researcher to present your data and a degree of analysis that is otherwise too difficult to communicate orally, and can help you in securing grants, communicating a persuasive idea, facilitating academic promotion, and influencing a global audience. And again, the key word here is global. Authors for whom English isn't their first language are at a natural disadvantage, as English is the accepted global language for research. And those researchers often need support to ensure that their research communication is as clear and as accurate and as persuasive as possible. Next slide, please. So now we're going to look at some of the more common reasons why the common language and grammar mistakes that English as a second language researchers make, and some tips on how to avoid them. And we're going to look at this. There are basically 6 main reasons or categories of reasons why these mistakes happen. It's around subject-verb agreements, the incorrect use of articles, the wrong use of tense, the incorrect use of prepositions, punctuation errors, and writing style errors. So let's look at the first one of these, which is around correct subject-verb agreements. So a very common error is the incorrect use of indefinite pronouns. Indefinite pronouns always go with singular verbs. So, for example, an incorrect sentence might be, everyone changed their mind. Everyone changes their mind. Indefinite pronouns such as anyone, everybody, everyone, anyone, no one, someone, always take the singular and need to be accompanied by singular verbs. It's always tempting to think that everybody is a plural subject. It's not. It's a singular subject. It refers to singulars, and then it refers to each and every person in the crowd. Therefore, it's singular. All of the air around us are polluted. Well, all again is taken as a singular pronoun. All of the air. Not all collective nouns are treated as singular, and some may be treated as plural, and therefore require some agreement with the plural verb. So, for example, an incorrect sentence might be the crowd cheer on. The crowd, in this particular case, is a singular. The crowd cheers on. Thousands of voters lines up outside of the polling booth. The correct way would be to use the plural. Thousands of voters line up outside the plural, outside the voting booth. Many nouns look plural, but it actually can count as singular nouns. And it should be noted that if the members of the noun are not acting in unity as a group, then the noun should be treated as plural and matches with the plural verb. Next slide, please. So now we're going to look at some rules for correct subject-verb agreement. And before I start, if you ever have any questions, can I please refer you also to, or if you're ever unsure, to refer to the Inago Academy, where there's a whole section looking specifically at correct subject-verb agreement. The Inago Academy is available to you free of charge, and I would urge you to use that link, which is at inago.com/academy. So some examples of rules for correct subject-verb agreement. Nouns that denote, for example, the amounts of time, money, and distance are treated as singular. So it's not correct to say 12 hours are a long time to wait, even though 12 hours is a plural. 12 hours was a long time to wait because time and distance is treated as a singular. $8,000 is too high a price to pay. Fractions can be both singular and plural, depending on the noun that they describe, which is confusing, but then again, English can be confusing sometimes. 50% of the book are composed of pictures is incorrect. It is composed of pictures. About 1/3 of the population has, not have. So always check the noun that they're describing. And neither or either is generally considered singular and agree with singular verbs. So neither of the cats is black, because neither is the single object. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so now here we're going to look at articles, again, at verb agreements. Articles such as the use of a and an. You know, one of the most common mistakes I see, particularly from ESL authors, particularly in Asia, I don't know why, is the incorrect use of definite and indefinite articles. So citric acid was used as a solvent, has to have an indefinite pronoun in there. Both films were weighed separately using an analytical balance. So again, the use of an indefinite article is very, very important. Select subject-verb agreement, again, used for singular and plural. Data from the AMT model are interpreted. Now, that one's a little bit contentious because I think you'll find some journals will accept data as singular and plural, but it's worth checking with your journal when your data should be taken as a plural. And for example, we first outline the overall architecture, then describe the components in detail, requires some form of a link between the subject and the object. We first outline the overall architecture and then describe the components in detail. Next slide, please. Okay, now we're going to look at some rules for correct article usage I've touched on already. But this is one of the most common things we see from authors, particularly in ESL countries. The definite article "the" should be used when we refer to any specific object and is used while referring to proper nouns or any subject-specific content. So, for example, the United Nations, founded in 1945, should have "the" inserted at the beginning. The United Nations, founded in 1945. Bringing test tubes from the table, that's fairly obvious. You need to have the definite pronoun bring the test tube from the table. Indefinite articles such as a and an are used when the noun being described is one of many items, but should always be used. The research is a major step forward in medical science. The Human Genome Project was an exciting development towards personalized medicine. And again, I refer you to the inago.com Academy, which will give you some further hints and tips about the use of indefinite articles and definite articles in your writing. Next slide, please. But any noun, when used in generic reference, is usually used in plural form without the definite article. So, for example, the colonies have been isolated from the plates. It's correct to say, in this case, colonies have been isolated from the plates. It's a noun that's been used in a generic reference rather than as a direct objective reference. Bring the test tube from the table is the correct way of expressing that particular sentence. And nouns that cannot be counted often have definite articles associated. Often have indefinite articles associated with them. So wisdom is not the product of schooling. The correct way to say that would be to use an indefinite article because it's a noun that cannot be counted. Wisdom is a product of schooling. The Human Genome Project was an exciting development, not the exciting development, because that cannot be measured. Next slide, please. So now we're going to look at where tense goes. Tense goes where within the manuscript, and there are some pretty hard and fast rules around this. It's not incorrect to use different tenses, but there is an expectation that particular types of tenses will be used within an academic manuscript. And again, I'll refer you to the Inago Academy for the usage of tense in academic writing. There are some very useful guides in there. The present tense is used to indicate that occurred at a non-specific time in the past, but also has relevance in the present. So the present perfect tense is also something sometimes used to introduce background information in a paragraph or after the first sentence, for example. The tense can shift to the simple past. So in an introduction, you would generally write in the simple present tense. This paper analyzes the effect of high temperatures on certain bacterial species is the correct way, is the preferred way of using that tense. The method section is usually written in the simple past tense. So statistical analysis were used to determine relationships between variables. And the discussions and conclusion sections of a paper are usually written in both present and past tenses. I'm sorry to confuse you, depending on the context. So table 1 presented the structural units. The correct way would be to say that table 1 presents the structural unit. So the discussion and conclusion you have to check the context, but can be used in both present and future tense is used to describe an action that will take place at a particular point in the future. Mostly any future studies that can be conducted from the present study. Next slide, please. And now we look at the present perfect tense. So this section is generally written in the present tense, the introduction. The discussion and conclusion sections can be written in both past and present tense. With this particular case here, we're looking at how the present perfect tense can be used within the background. So numerous researchers have used this method. It's a correct way to express that sentence. Future tense is used to describe the possibility of any future studies that can be conducted. We or future studies will and analyze the colonies to find out strains rather than saying what has happened. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we'll look at just summarize the correct verb with the correct tenses. Verb tenses inform the readers when a certain event or action takes place. Past tense is used to report the findings of a study. Present perfect tense is used to describe an ongoing research or a general opinion. And present tense is used to give an overview of the topic and state the main points of study. And again, I'd urge you to use the section on tense usage in academic writing on the Inargo Academy pages in case you have any questions or you need to check the correct usage. Next slide, please. So now we look at how to use prepositions correctly. And just to remind everyone, what is a preposition? A preposition is a word that tells you where or when something is in relation to something else. So an example of a preposition include words like after, before, on, under, inside, outside. So if we look at a couple of those, in and into, on and onto, what is the correct usage of those two examples? So in, the samples were placed in the tubes rather than into the tubes, as is the current present action. I placed the Petri dish onto the table because it's an action of movement towards the table. Of, to indicate reference, is important and is often incorrectly used. So we give two examples here of how of should be used. This technique allows the controlled synthesis of nanoscale carbon-shaped rods. Is the correct way. You wouldn't say for that necessarily, as there's no genitive relationship. The chemical data show the table of content results of the Sinambo formation. The correct way would be to say that the data shows the top results for the formation. Check the relationship of the objects. Next slide, please. And now we have punctuation rules. For the punctuation rules, the comma is another contentious point. And again, journals will often have their own rules around the use of commas. I'm often surprised at some of the levels of detail that some journals expect. The film journal, so the use of the comma, you would use a comma in sentences to show that something is following, like a quotation or an example or a list, for example. So the film label can thus function as a simple decimeter, comma, which. So always use the comma to link two parts of the sentence to show that something is following. Semicolons are used to join two independent clauses or two independent thoughts that can stand alone as a complete sentence. So the absorbance properties of film labels were measured using a UVVIS. I'm looking at the wrong one. The semicolon in this particular case is that there are two types of dosimeters, and then you have the list, active dosimeters and something else. Rock formation in the area is dominated by volcanic rock sediment, young and old rocks, and are present in the volcanic zones because you're linking two thoughts or two sentences together using a colon. But do check the use of the comma, the correct use of the comma for some of the journals that you might be submitting to. Next slide, please. So always check with the journal the required writing style. Most international journals will accept both, but it's worth checking in case there is a preferred style. I know from experience, for example, a lot of the American society journals will expect American English rather than British English or international English. So do check the writing style that's required first, as it can impact. I mean, one of the impacts, for example, is the use of contractions. You know, some American journals, American English journals are more relaxed about the use of contractions such as won't or don't or can't. They're not incorrect, but often the uncontracted version is preferred. Particularly for British English journals, but it's worth checking the journal writing style before you submit your paper. And again, there are tools available that can help you to do that. Capitalization is also an important area. Make sure that you're not incorrectly assigning as capitals to any given noun or nouns or compound nouns, and that you're using spacing rules correctly. So as we see here with the example of electric power. Slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier on, contractions are not incorrect, but most journals will prefer, particularly the British English journals, but most journals will prefer for you not to use contractions. So rather than saying weren't, were not, can't, try to use the full uncontracted version where you can. And then things like typographical errors are very common. So you see the incorrect use of the word India. Make sure you're using the next slide, please. So we've looked at some very common mistakes. Now let's look at some strategies that you can use to improve your language skills. And the first thing I'd like you to do is to answer this particular poll, which is: what measures do you take to ensure language correctness in your professional writing? And again, you can select any one or multiple answers here as which of these you would use yourself. I'm interested to see what you're using. So can you please answer this poll? Proofread multiple times? Do you use AI writing assistants such as Trinker AI, which is an Inago tool? Do you attend language courses? Do you read extensively to improve your vocabulary? Do you use professional editing services, or none of the above? So hopefully you've answered the poll. Can we see the results, please? Okay, a mixture of things here. The most common response is the use of AI writing assistants such as Trinker to check your language, which is great. Proofreading multiple times by 50% of you. Attending language courses, not so many of you have done that. 25% I've only said that reading extensively to improve vocabulary, and 33% have used professional editing services. So let's look at some of these in a bit more detail. Thank you for your responses so far. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to look at some tips to avoid language errors and actually go back to some of the questions that were asked in that particular poll. Read, and read. Cannot underestimate the importance of broadening your English by extensive reading of language journal articles, books, science magazines, anything you can that will perhaps extend your knowledge and grasp of the language. Familiarize yourself with unknown words. Use dictionaries, thesauri, thesaurus to learn new terms. Encourage yourself to learn new words every day. Maybe keep a notebook for new terminologies or new technical words, particularly within your subject discipline. Try and understand the origin, the etymology of the word. It can often help you to understand why that particular word is important. Practice, practice, and practice. Actively use vocabulary in conversations, in related articles, just to make sure you've got that correct grasp. And using AI writing assistants will help to scan your written work for simple grammatical errors. And we're seeing our own AI tools being used increasingly, specifically for that purpose. Next slide, please. So let's just look at some tips about making your writing precise. Specificity helps establish a baseline for what is normal, allowing the reader to interpret the meaningfulness of changes presented. For example, the phrase, a decrease in circulating cortisol levels to 120 ng, is meaningless if the reader doesn't know what is expected as normal value was before experimentation or intervention. So adding precision to your scientific writing by supplementing numbers to words such as increase or decrease is a very useful tip. Rather than presenting raw values, establish a baseline for readers to establish why the change is noteworthy. And express your values either as a fold, twofold, threefold, fourfold, or as a percentage change. And we give some examples here of the correct way of maybe making your statement more precise. Treatment A resulted in significant fourfold increase in circulating cortisol levels to 480 ng. That's very specific. That cannot be considered. There's no ambiguity in there at all. In a recent study, Duffy demonstrated that the protective antibody levels were 99.8% 1 year after vaccination, decreasing to 82.46% and 51.79% after 2 and 3 years after vaccination, respectively. They are absolutely ambiguous and clear. To try and make your writing as specific as possible by supplementing numbers to words. Next slide, please. And also make sure that you're placing relevant, pertinent information accurately within the sentence. If the reader wants to know more about a reference, for example, we give an example here about the use of lengthy citations, fillers before summarizing, presenting findings. Focus on the key aspects. So you don't need to say where the author is from or who the author is, apart from perhaps the name and the year. It's enough simply to give the name and the year of the reference before moving forward. Begin the sentence with a principal finding by stressing the key points, such as placing the most important information on the stress position. So a twofold decrease in the number of natural killer cells was observed in immuno cells. So you're placing that twofold increase. That's the stress point of that subject. Place it at the beginning. Another example is given below around peripheral vasoconstriction occurs to decrease heat loss. Use that tip to place the principle first. Next slide, please. Also choosing appropriate words. Again, something we see very common is the incorrect use of therefore and thereby. Therefore indicates a conditional action, or in simple terms, for that reason, whereas thereby represents a process, or in simple terms, as a result of that. And you often see the two incorrectly used. So the example given here, 3 participants opted out of the study, therefore reducing the sample. It's incorrect to say therefore, because it's as a result of that. 3 participants opted out of the study as a result of that, thereby the sample size was reduced by 497. And again, we see the same example where thereby is used incorrectly, because thereby is for that reason. 3 participants dropped out of the study, and for that reason, therefore, the sample size was reduced. So check your use of therefore and thereby. Next slide, please. And again, common errors is the use of between versus among. Between must be used when exactly 2 elements are involved. and among should be used where there are more than two elements involved. So between is two, among is three or more, or two or more. Well, more than two, yeah. So it's incorrect to say, because it's qualitative, quantitative, and mixed researchers, between is incorrect because there are more than two elements. So it should be you should be using among in that particular context. Again, you see, we often see errors in the use of may versus might. May denotes permission, whereas might denotes possibility. So it's incorrect to say that these findings may have implications, because it denotes the possibility rather than the permission. It's correct to say these findings might have implications for medical because of that possibility. Next slide, please. And again, this is so common, the incorrect use of your and their. And it's not just ESL authors that make this mistake. I can assure you, these are very common mistakes about among English, native English language speakers as well. The use of your, Y-O-U-R, to show possession, or your, which is the contracted form of you are. It's incorrect to say, your discussion spelt in that way with the reviewer is insightful. Make sure you're using the correct contracted form. Your discussion with the reviewer was insightful. Y-O-U-R. And there, and there, three completely different words with three different spellings are always so often used incorrectly. Make sure you're using the right form of that word. There denotes a location, whereas there, T-H-E-I-R, denotes possessive form, them, and there, T-H-E-R-E, is the contracted. That's incorrect. I beg your pardon. That should be there is not the contracted form of they are. That should be the T-H-E-Y-R-E. Correct in the example below. And we will correct this error in presentation to share afterwards. Next slide, please. Appropriate placement of numbers is also important. Consistency in your formatting choices is one way to demonstrate your attention to detail. It's that consistency. It's not so much whether you're using the numbers, the numerical, or the spelt out versions, but it's the consistency of usage that's important. Avoid starting a sentence with a numeral. It's a good tip. Try spelling out the numbers or rephrasing the sentence. If you're going to use that number at the start of the sentence, it's more correct to say that. It's not wrong to put the number, but it's more correct to use the spelt out version. And then if you're using the spelt out version at the start of the sentence, try and be consistent throughout. So the example here, for example, 7,500 patient records were submitted for analysis. It's a large number which you wouldn't expect to write out. So therefore, records from 7,500 patients were submitted for analysis would be the better way to express that. And again, you see another example of the 5-hydroxytryptamine derived from tryptophan. You would not put 5-hydroxytryptamine at the start of the sentence. You would move that. You would actually phrase it in that particular way. The neurotransmitter is derived from tryptophan. And again, you see here the use of the incorrect mixed use of numbers and spelt out words. Be consistent. The national park has 15 tigers, numerical, 8 pandas, numerical, 12 zebras, numerical, or have it written out in the example below. Be consistent in your usage of in the placement of numbers. Next slide, please. And then we have anthropomorphism in scientific writing, which is the attribution of human-like characteristics, feelings, behaviors to non-human entities, and which can result in certain of ambiguities. So here's an example of the correct use of that characteristic. The study found that bacterial growth accelerated in media containing glucose. The study can't find anything because the study is not a human entity. The study can't find it. If researchers or investigators that find conclusions based on something that it's correct to say that the researchers found that bacterial growth or the study revealed, not assigning any value apart from simply revealing the fact to the study. make sure you're not associating any human-like characteristics with a non-human entity, such as a study. The example below, the study explored the effects of heat and pressure. Well, it wasn't the study that explored it, it was the researchers that explored it. In the study, researchers explored the effects of heat and pressure, etc. So make sure you're not assigning those human-like characteristics to a non-human entity. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've looked at some tips and in terms of how you can improve your own language. If you need more help, or if you need this, one of the reasons why we're here today is to use professional editors to support your work. And now we're going to just spend a few moments looking at the importance that high impact academic editing can have when it's done by professional editors. Next slide. So how does a professional editing service like Inago, for example, help to improve your chances of journal acceptance? As I said at the beginning, it doesn't guarantee acceptance. The paper may fail because the journal's out of scope, or the article's out of scope, I beg your pardon, or the research may be incomplete, but it takes away that hurdle of language. And by using a professional editor, it helps you to identify gaps in the manuscript, because you have a subject matter expert working with you on a manuscript. It establishes a coherent structure in the manuscript. It ensures that there are no grammatical errors or punctuation mistakes in the manuscript. It helps to identify inconsistencies in the manuscript. It can avoid potential ethical issues in the manuscript by checking for unintentional, which is often the case, plagiarism. It will result in more succinct, clear, and readable content, making it a good fit for publication, hopefully, and gives an opportunity to review the manuscripts and anything that might be missing from the manuscript. So it's not just a question of fixing the grammar, it's much more than that. If we move to the next slide, which will talk about the benefits of the relationship now that we have between Chula and Inago. So why is Chula working with Inago? Why is Chula recommending Inago, I should say? Well, Inago is recommended by a brand that's trusted by authors and recommended by publishers all over the world. We're recognized by prestigious international publishers as a trustworthy academic authoring support service. And we've been used by more than 2 million authors worldwide with a very, very high 99.4% client satisfaction rate. And we're often the go-to choice to help the author achieve their publication goals. Everything is subject matched, specially subject matched. So every manuscript sent to us is matched to an editor with a highly specialized subject area expertise. We have more than 2,000 editors that we work with. So if you send us a paper in neurology, for example, we won't just give it to a medical specialist, we'll give it to somebody who's got a background in neurology, and we match it to a very, very high level. Every paper is seen by 2 editors. We were one of the first to introduce a 2-editor system, which means that every manuscript that is submitted is reviewed and edited by 2 separate highly skilled editors to ensure consistency in language quality and accuracy, and by having multiple experts examining the work. This involves one editor focusing on the technical content and the other on the overall language fluency and style. So basically every manuscript is fully reviewed by 2, normally PhD of 89% of our guarantee flawless quality. We only assign native English speakers to the work from countries like the UK, USA, Canada, Australia. These are specialists who are native English speaking. It can enhance the overall quality of the paper. If you're an early career researcher, for example, and you don't have any experience of writing research papers or submitting them for publication, then Inago can provide a good option for you, because we help you with language, we help with grammar, formatting, enhancing the quality of the paper, and by using our professional editing and proofreading services, more than 2 million authors from around the world have been able to achieve their publication goals, often in high impact factor journals of their choice. And we've got a number of different publication support services which go beyond editing if you need additional support in other areas like submissions, or if you need to produce a graphical abstract, or if you need a video, for example, we can also. And then we have the Inago promise. And the Inago promise is very simple, is that we guarantee that a manuscript edited by us will never be rejected on the basis of poor language. It might be rejected because there are gaps in the science. It might be rejected because it's not in scope for the journal. But if it's rejected for language, we will guarantee either refunding you the fee or helping you to improve the language so that you can submit the paper again to another journal and fix any language issues that might have been addressed. Next slide, please. So what's the difference between proofreading and editing? Well, proofreading is just one very small part of the parcel, which we would urge you to look after yourself. Proofreading doesn't just fix the language errors, it fixes, editing will fix the errors, it will check the style and consistency, it will make sure you use the correct words, and the sentence structure and flow is as good as it can be. All those other things will be automatically included as part of that process. You can't do a grammatical check without doing a language spelling check. So there is a clear difference. We would expect the authors, though, to be able to proofread themselves and then come to us once the article is good enough to be professionally edited. So here are some tips for you to then proofread yourself. Watch out for words that share the same pronunciation or spelling that can mean different things, like, for example, week and week. If you can't justify a point, statement, or sentence, or word, then get rid of it. You need to be able to support whatever you say. Don't overlook headings, bibliographies, tables, pages, page numbers, or footnotes. Make sure they are there. Those sections are included. Reading from a hard copy can often help. I know most of you will want to read on screen, but often reading from a hard copy can help to highlight potential things that need to be changed. Reading your work out loud will often help to catch some errors, particularly reading it out loud to a colleague. That one of the two of you may notice something in that process. Put your writing aside for a while. Review it with a fresh mind. It can sometimes help you to identify potentially new errors. Use an AI-based grammar checker tool like Trinker. And I notice nearly 3/4 of you said that you have used AI tools such as Trinker already, so please continue to do that. Make a list of common errors and check carefully for those errors. The errors that you make, the use of indefinite pronouns, incorrect use of words like there, your, for example. Make a list of those words that you know that you are prone to using incorrectly. Break down your proofreading to spot one kind of error at a time. It's also important. Don't focus on the entire thing. Look at, are you looking at language? Are you looking at spelling? Are you looking at the prepositions, for example? And check the numbers and calculations, that you're being consistent throughout the paper, and that your calculations, of course, are correct. This is where many mistakes can happen. So, a final checklist. So, your paper is ready for submission once you've defined the abbreviations and symbols properly and used them correctly. Verified all the facts, figures, and references. You've ensured conciseness, clarity, and coherence, and a proper logical flow. That you've corrected all grammatical and typographical errors. That you've avoided any ambiguity that may have occurred because of the way you may have phrased something in the article, and removed redundant words or phrases. You've drafted the content considering the target audience. So you're writing for scientific audience, you're written for a high-level audience. Is the paper reflecting that audience? And that you followed the journal guidelines thoroughly. And again, I can't stress how important it is for certain journals that you follow those guidelines thoroughly. And if you've got any questions, you're unsure, that's where Inago can help with any one of those areas. Okay, so we've reached the end of the presentation itself. Now we have a Q&A session. So please, if you've not done so already, please send us your questions using the questions tab of either chat box, or drop your questions, or feel free to drop us your questions and share your struggles and experiences. So do we have any questions that we can share? Oh, yes, of course. And finally, click on this QR code to get access to the Chulalongkorn University Inago Editing Services page for more information about the service that's being offered. Okay, thanks everyone. Do we have any questions? It's all very quiet.
Well, thank you, Tony, for the excellent session. Ms. Pakwika, can you please invite authors to ask questions or probably type in the Q&A box once?
We have a few minutes, so yes.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so thank you very much, speaker, for actionable tips for improving writing skill. Last, I would like to invite Associate Professor Dr. Pani for closing remarks.
I'm not sure if there is any question from the floor.
There was a single question about the partnership, the discount rate. So I have responded that question on the Q&A box. If there is any other question, please feel free. We have received a comment on the chat. Thank you very much for all your useful suggestions and tips. That's for you, Tony.
Thank you. You're welcome anytime. But I will say, I really would urge you to use the Inago Academy pages. The Inago Academy is a great resource for information to help you in preparing your academic writing. Inago.com/academy, and you'll find there's a whole range of free information and really useful information that you can use.
Yes, so if we don't have any question from the floor, I think that 1 hour is quite short, right? For this
Yes.
session, because there are lots of topics or issues that we would like we should know about the language editing or language error. So anyway, I think that this session is quite useful for us, maybe as a guideline for us to do the checklist for ourselves before we submit our paper to the journal. Okay, so I would like to take this opportunity to thank you, Toby, a lot, and thank you, Nicole and Inago team as well, to providing this useful session to us. And thank you, our audience. I hope this session will be useful for you all. And if you would like the Sobajo or Internet, the Office of Research Affairs to do anything for you, or would like to have any suggestion, you can suggest us to the maybe in this chat box or in the we have the line OA as well for the research office. So feel free to contact us. We will provide you as much as possible. Okay, thank you so much for Inago team and for our Jula members. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Prof. Pani. Okay, please respond to the feedback email that you'll be receiving post this session. Have a great day. Sawadee ka. Bye.
สวัสดีครับ
สวัสดีค่ะ